Well, welcome back. We are now heading into the second panel, which is fittingly titled, Talking About My Generative AI. And this one should be a lot of fun. This panel discussion will feature some of the brightest minds in the field of GEOINT. When we prepared for this panel, I was a little in awe of just the amazing credentials and experiences of each of these panel members. And there are a lot of them. As you can see by the chairs, this is a big panel. This panel will discuss the impact of generative AI on matters related to GEOINT, including GEOINT assurance and uses and limitations of synthetic data for GEOINT work in the terrestrial world and the metaverse. I would like to welcome the panelists to the stage. First off, we have Matt Klaric, a program integration lead. Actually, this has changed. He is the predictive analytics pod lead from research from NGA. Nathan Kundtz, Ph.D., who is the CEO of Rendered.AI. Devaki Raj, the founder and CEO of Crowd.AI. Sean O'Brien, Ph.D., Vice President of Intelligent Systems Laboratory at HRL Laboratories. And Yuri Robinson, co-founder of the Robinson Consulting Group. This panel will be moderated by none other than Dr. Nadine Alameh, who is the CEO of the Open Geospatial Consortium, or OGC. OGC is a collective problem-solving body convening the global community of geospatial experts and their users. They use consensus-based standards, collaborative innovation projects, and industry partnerships to make location information fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Dr. Alameh is a passionate leader with a mission of accelerating the impact of organizations using or producing geospatial or location information, with a proven track record in multiple domains, including aviation, Earth observation, public safety, and defense. Nadine sits on the board of the Private Sector Network of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, and on the board of the U.S. National Geospatial Advisory Committee, which is a federal advisory committee sponsored by the U.S. Department of the Interior. Prior to leading OGC, Nadine held various roles within industry, including Northrop Grumman, as CEO of an aviation data exchange startup, and even as a technical advisor to NASA. Nadine graduated from MIT with a PhD in Information Systems Engineering, along with 2 master's degrees and a BS in Computer Engineering. Please welcome to the stage your panel.
Hello, hello. Thank you, Tara, for this wonderful introduction, and thank you, amazing panelists, for being here. And most importantly, thank you, audience, for being here on a Sunday. So, ChatGPT, who's heard of it? Good, we're on the same page. So, ChatGPT, as of yesterday at least, currently has over 100 million users. And I think everybody knows that they've acquired 1 million users in a record time in 5 days after they launched. And apparently, my 11-year-old son was one of these users. And this is how I want to start, because I always learn a lot from watching the young generation and what they're doing with these technologies, generative AI, so generating content. It could be music, it could be text, it could be images, it could be maps, it could be digital twins, and it could be way more, as we'll see. So, my son, 5th grade, apparently, and his entire class, they had an assignment to write an essay about the Oregon Trail, and more than half of these 11-year-olds used ChatGPT. And what did the teacher do? She said, "This is great. I don't need your essays anymore. The deliverable is not the essay anymore. Keep it. What I want is a debate. You stand up based on the information that you have gathered, ChatGPT or Voodoo, she doesn't care. And you have to debate, right, what you've learned in front of other people and in front of judges. And that's how overnight that teacher has changed what the deliverables to assignments are going to be for this 5th grade class. And I totally see us here today doing the same thing for GEOINT. We have this new technology, which earlier we heard in the keynote is both exciting and scary. And it could change, it could disrupt, it could accelerate certain things we'd like to do, as in maybe disasters or emergency response, and we get over spending most of our time collecting the data and finding the data and integrating the data and doing the maps. And earlier we saw from the digital, they got a PowerPoint and they printed. It's like we get over all of that and we start to focus on what we really need to focus on, right? The decisions outside of the GEOINT. And we have an amazing group of experts here today that are going to share with you. Honestly, I don't think we've seen, this is probably the first panel on this topic. Generative AI, geospatial intelligence, geospatial in general. So definitely take notes, and I bet you we will run out of time. So let me do some quick introductions. Sounds good? Maybe I'll start with you, Yuri. So I don't want to read their bios, because please check out the program conference, because their bios are so impressive. I just underlined like the wow in their bios. So Yuri Robinson, great to have you, co-founder of the Robinson Consulting Group, and over 15 years of experience supporting NGA, helping government agencies pilot and deploy innovative capabilities across GEOINT enterprises. So I'm willing to bet generative AI is one of these innovations. So can you share how this is coming into your work right now?
Well, in general, can you hear me? Okay. So in general, from where my aspect comes into the play as far as understanding the end-to-end integration of capabilities. And so one of the big things is really understanding, for one, what is the end state of this new type of technology? What are we trying to get to? Because that's usually one of the main issues that I have to face, is understanding what that mission outcome is relative to generative AI. One of the things that also comes into the play is the actual IT infrastructure related to that. And so I'm sure we will get into various topics related to just the sheer amount of data that is required to run these type of capabilities. And so from end to end, that's kind of where I come in.
That's fascinating. You have an amazing job. So our next panelist is Devaki, and she's the founder and CEO of Crowd.AI. Also, just what I've underlined from her bio, listen to this. Mission-first AI technology platform enabling persistent analysis from pixel to common operating picture. That's Crowd.AI. But Devaki was before at Google, so Maps, Energy, X Teams. She's sitting here with us today. She's Inc. and Forbes magazine's 30 under 30, which is amazing. So tell us, how are you coming across generative AI these days? What's the opportunity for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So have been working with the US government since 2016, just building best-in-class computer vision models. But with generative AI coming on board, we're now able to use a lot of the features around generative AI to create synthetic data for training data to train our models. So up until now, for the last 7 years or so, we had to curate data sets to focus on specific missions. But with generative AI, you have a broader set of data that you could potentially use for creating models. So that's kind of how generative AI is transforming the way we do our work.
That's great. I heard data and I heard data. So there's a theme there. So Forbes 30 under 30. Sean O'Brien, Vice President, Intelligent Systems Laboratory, HRL Lab. He's the 2021 Artificial Intelligence Industry Executive of the Year, sitting at the stage today. I've also underlined his leadership of Northrop's Algorithmic Warfare Group, making advances in the applications of AI, ML to critical DoD and IC missions. He's known for making AI-enabled systems truly engineerable, creating tools, techniques, technologies, processes that will enable the AI systems to be developed, tested, operated. So going from the hype, I think, to how to actually make it work, and where does this generative AI come into your bubble?
So yeah, we're really using it in two ways. One, actually applying it to autonomous systems, which seems maybe a little bit of a stretch at first when you think about what generative AI is known for, creating images, doing large language models. But it turns out a lot of the technologies inherent in that, like transformer technologies, and the idea of attention, are actually useful in other areas of AI beyond just creating text and creating images. And so pulling that apart and applying it to things like logic and reasoning in AI is something that we're finding great utility in. And then finally, we're using generative AI to technologies to try to bound their behavior and figure out what they can and can't do, and what missions they can apply to and what missions they can't, how to test it, right? And again, how to make it engineerable. So those are the things that we're really looking at with generative AI right now in my team.
That's great. Thank you, Sean. So we're going, Forbes AI Tech Executive of the Year, and I'm looking at Nathan's bio. So Nathan Kundtz, CEO of Rendered.AI, and he is one of the top 10 LinkedIn tech professionals under 40, one of Goldman Sachs' 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs, also on this stage. And his career and his education, artificial intelligence, metamaterial, microwave devices, and now Rendered.AI. Data, but synthetic data. So synthetic data sets to train artificial intelligence systems and building an infrastructure that allows engineers to customize and modify. And I bet you have a lot to say about generative AI.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on the panel. So at Rendered.AI, we have really emphasized physics-based synthetic data because that's how we're able to introduce new information. And yet we find that there's tremendous power to be gained by using generative techniques. So we use that for 3D modeling, for backgrounds, for procedural effects. It really helps us to accelerate the introduction of real-world diversity into the scenes that we then model physically. And so that really has helped us to, again, create diversity and improve the outcomes in synthetic data systems. But where we see it going is actually a lot of code creation is becoming so quick that you no longer even need to write some of that simulation code, and that's going to change the way in which people can interact with synthetic data. And then ultimately, we're headed in a direction where I think it's not even going to be necessarily people that are requesting synthetic data, but systems that are requesting synthetic data, and those will be driven by models like large language models and generative AI. And so we have a roadmap for how we'll be able to integrate synthetic data into those sorts of more hierarchical systems over time.
Wow. Are you feeling the excitement? I mean, this is amazing. Speaking of excitement, our last panelist, Matt Klaric, Predictive Analytics Pod Lead at NGA. Once again, so right now directing a team developing capabilities which analyze current and historical data to make predictions about future and unknown events. But also, again, a bio that shows a career managing a portfolio of programs that brought new and innovative AI technologies. So it doesn't get any more expert than this panel. So this is innovative AI technologies. You brought them to military service partners. And I see here listed, I think everybody has heard of Project Maven. So Matt, sitting here on the stage, has been instrumental in securing the initial funding for Project Maven, DoD's pathfinding AI program. I see here you have co-founded, in the early 2010s, automated change detection in commercial satellites imagery. What have you not done, Matt? And so now what's getting you excited about generative AI in your work?
Yeah, so there's quite a number of applications for generative AI that we've got our eyes on at NGA. Always tough going last here in the list of people that describe some of these things. But many applications in synthetic generation, not just for things like object detection applications, but for other computer vision applications as well. So that's something that we've got some active work on, very, very interested, very exciting. Playing on what you just said as well, we'll be at a point where it's not humans that are, prescribing the parameters for how we're going to generate the synthetic data that's required for this, but we'll need to get to a point where that's procedural and code is requesting the data that's required, because we need data that's going to be useful for making the algorithms better, as opposed to imagery that looks good for humans to look at, because that's ultimately what we're after with the synthetic data for those types of applications, is what's going to be most useful to make the algorithms better in a variety of conditions, variety of operating conditions, and not introduce unnecessary artifacts and bias and the like. So, that's one of the many things we have going. So,
that's fascinating. So once again, very humbled by your presence here on the stage. I'm going to start. So USGIF is amazing, preparing the GEOINT symposium. So they've helped us get ready. I have a list of questions that I would rather not use, and instead use your questions. So this is a great time as you're listening to our panelists. You've got the QR code behind us. You have any question, it honestly doesn't get any more expert than this expert panel, and this is the first generative AI conversation we have in a big event like the GEOINT Symposium. So I would definitely encourage you to submit your questions. I'm going to start with the easiest two questions, which are what's the most promising, exciting application, right? Because we need to inspire everybody. I heard a lot about young generation as well, and professionals and skills, but also the decision makers and the procurement people. And I'm going to ask about what's the challenges, right? And the audience, you have to fill in between these two questions. Deal? Deal. All right. Silence is consensus. So maybe I'm looking at you, Nathan. What's the most promising application?
Well, it's hard to answer most promising. Like what I see happening in the industry is there will be at least 4 different kind of categories of adoption, and we'll start with things like just generated images, sort of being able to use that. That'll lead us to the ability to ask better questions of our systems. I don't want to get too technical, but large language models and sort of understanding an embedding space kind of go hand in hand, and so that's leading to new database ideas. But that's going to then bring us to the ability to ask questions that are simpler, and it's really going to drop the level of expertise, I think, required to access deep GIS knowledge. That'll be exciting. And then the final phase, and maybe the most exciting, is when we start to get the computers asking the questions in the first phase. And after that, it's going to get really weird. In terms of challenges, I think, look, the technology development is unlikely, in my opinion, to be the principal challenge here. The reality is these need to be integrated into human systems, companies, bureaucracy, policy. And that's where the challenge is going to be. And that's not, I don't say that in a sort of like a derogatory way. Like, we really have to be thinking about that as organizations and organizations of organizations. And that's going to be hard. And I think that's where we'll find the most difficulty in adopting these technologies.
All right. Yes, please, Devaki.
Yeah, in addition, I think there's 2 things, which is the first in terms of where we're going, and what's really exciting is that right now a lot of people are interfacing with ChatGPT, which is large language models. Over the next months and years, you're going to start making it multimodal. So you're going to bring in language, sensors, videos, imagery. And that's what's really exciting, because then you can have a holistic view of generating things that are much more akin to what's happening in the real world. So that's going to be really exciting. In terms of challenges, I think geospatial data is in a very interesting space. There's a lot of geospatial data, but there isn't common geo standards. One of the things that NGA recently is doing is releasing something called GeoCoco as part of the Luna contract. And I think that's going to be really interesting as they start making structure around this wild, wild west of data and moving into that. So I think that'll be a great place for generative AI to start taking hold and being more part of the ecosystem for generative AI.
Yeah, Yuri, I feel you're dying to say something.
One aspect to that, I think of the creation of data, and so we're using the application of synthetic data, especially for things like military exercises. That is going to be key. So there's a lot of planning efforts. There's a lot of themes as far as saving time with using this various technology. So in all the times I'm talking with users of GEOINT, they're trying to shorten the timeline. They're trying to go from 6 hours to 6 minutes, 6 minutes to 6 seconds. So that's probably the most promising thing that I can see, being able to shorten that.
Yeah.
Sean.
Yeah, one of the challenges we've heard about a lot lately, and it's been in the news, is the idea that these models are massive, right? And they require enormous amounts of data, enormous amounts of processing power, and the challenge that might bring in terms of really centralizing, access to these things and talking to people in the government and industry. That's one of the big worries that people have is, well, how do we democratize this so that the labs and academia have access to these kinds of things? And I actually think there's a lot of work that's already been done and progress that's being made just today in terms of that. And so I actually anticipate over the next few months and years, there will be a democratization as people figure out how to make these things more efficient and how to apply them to more specific areas where you might have a chat GPT type thing that just applies just to GEOINT, right? That doesn't require all the data in the world and all of Wikipedia and all of that. So I think that's one of the big trends that's coming in.
Yeah, Matt.
And so, one other thing you alluded to it a second ago is the human aspect of this, the tradecraft involved in how you integrate something like a chat GPT into your analytical workflow if you're an Intel analyst.
Right.
What does that look like? That's a very different way. And going back to your opening comments about the 5th grade class and how does that change the dynamic of what it means to be in a class? I think you'll see a similar shift as some of these technologies get adopted within various parts of the Intel community about how you actually have to interact with these technologies, how that evolves our tradecraft, and what does that mean? Big changes there.
Yeah, I can see the excitement. I was telling Christy earlier, this panel is so amazing. We almost need a buzzer in the middle when there's a question. Who buzzes first and answers it? Because there's so much that you can share, and I hope everybody can get together with them afterwards, especially after we have lunch afterwards. We're starting to see the questions coming in, so please keep them coming. I've heard recently a couple of terms. Globe GPT, Geo GPT. Has anybody heard of the globe, of the Earth GPT? Yes? Devaki, you're saying yes. What is that? What would it look like?
I think the term is, again, this is a term that you could fit whatever narrative you want to that term, right? So one could think about, GeoGPT as perhaps building a digital twin of, I know the last panelist talked about a digital twin of the Earth for, as Yuri mentioned, for simulations. So for example, right, you have companies like Black Shark AI, Maxar with a lot of their 3D renderings, and NVIDIA's Omniverse. So I think that's a version of potentially what could be a GeoGPT, which is a generative world that has a lot of different interactions. But then you could also say GeoGPT in terms of bringing a lot of data from different sensors and humans can prompt to that. So I think that it could take the shape of multiple things. So just you could define it how you want.
So I am seeing the questions coming in, and there are 2 themes. Synthetic data, because that's scary, because it's not real data, and then workforce. I think I can classify them. So let me actually ask the question. Maybe Yuri and Nathan, you can give us your insights first. It's very well phrased. How do we prevent synthetically generated training data becoming a self-generating ecosystem that justifies subjective outcomes? Because that has impacts on national security. Yuri, you want to start, and then Nathan?
Yeah, and so from the aspect of policies and permissions, I immediately think about a movie about 15 years ago called Eagle Eye, as far as trying to prevent that from happening, right? You have the system was called ARIA, as a matter of fact, where it did everything itself, didn't need a human in a loop. And so where that's going to come into place is really setting specific policy about what type of data can be accessed related to these models and what that specific output will be in order to accomplish your outcome. And so being able to allow a system to review a data, write a report, send it to policymakers without anybody in the loop, I can see how that would be scary. I know that Todd had mentioned that during his keynote, and so there's going to be some policy that needs to be put in place at some point.
Yeah, so we need to make, so Sean earlier said we need to make it all engineerable, but you're bringing also the policy side. And I know, Nathan, you live in this world.
I live in this world, yeah. I mean, so maybe it's worth just kind of commenting on sort of where synthetic data sits in an engineering context to start with. So, my first company was a hardware company, and I really was keen that we always went through a process of estimate, then calculate, then simulate. And we want to do pen and paper, understand things at a fundamental level, then you get your spreadsheet model or your MATLAB, and then you start to do simulation. And I think synthetic data is just like the natural extension of that. It's like the piece that you need after that if you're going to integrate AI into your systems. But all of those need to be justified by things that happen in the real world. Right, like you don't sit around and calculate forever and then never get around to figuring out whether it's real. There's always experimentation based on real world data, and synthetic data, and I think all the things we're talking about have workflows where that's critical. And so, I don't think we're headed towards a world where this sort of spirals out of control. I think this is sort of natural next step of engineering when you start to use artificial intelligence inside of your platforms.
Matt, can I hear your perspective, because you live in as operational as it gets?
Sure. Yeah, and agree with what both of you said on that. I guess the one thing that in that workflow of synthetic generation that I think maybe this question in part is getting at is we need to be cautious about what sorts of things can be done to poison data sets that might be used for those for those computer vision applications. So there's certainly attacks. You've seen the sticker on a stop sign example and those types of things. That's something to be mindful of, and so we need to make sure that as synthetic data finds its way increasingly into data sets that are used for these applications, that we know exactly what's going into them, we know exactly what the provenance of that information is, how it's being generated, why it's being generated, if computers are the ones that are queuing its generation, so that we have an understanding of how that all fits together.
Can I build on this? And the buzzer, imagine the buzzer in the middle, okay? Because this is a good question. What's your greatest fear about two adversary countries' use of generative AI if they're not ethically constrained?
Fear about
see?
adversarial countries.
Yeah.
Oh,
so what's the biggest fear here?
Well, they're not constrained by not all of them are constrained in their behavior in the way that we constrain ourselves. And so, there are tremendous opportunities. We talked about how, one of the great opportunities of generative AI is it can make everyone an expert, right? You can, if I want to do, create malicious code, right? I no longer have to know how to program a computer in order to create that. I could ask a chatbot to generate the code for me, and then I can put it out on the internet immediately. And so it's not just deep fakes, it's not just creating synthetic data that looks like real things. It's really going to be a multiplier for asymmetric threats across the board. And so that's my biggest fear is in that world. So in the world of malicious intent and making everyone an expert. We talk about how we have all these cyber criminals that are just working in basements in various countries, and that can get to everywhere in the world from where they are, and now you could have anyone do that with very little expertise. So that's a big risk.
Yeah, honestly, it's like the time to building these potentious malicious code. Before it used to have you have to have people building it. Now with code being generated immediately, right? Then you can inject it, and then you have to continuously create systems that then track it much more quickly. I mean, that's I think a very specific example. But even right now, deep fakes are probably the best use, and with the election coming up and things like that, right? It's not just other countries; it also could happen within the U.S. So there's just there's a lot of room for where this could go bad, but there's also a lot of room where this could provide a lot of value.
Yeah, I really appreciate this dialogue because I think it's one of the few dialogues when we talk about geospatial, GEOINT, national security, engineering, policies, ethics, adversary countries, all in one context. So we need to be prepared on multiple levels. And again, please keep your questions coming. And it does feel from the audience, I think the amount of questions on this topic, that one of the ways we need to be prepared is on the human side. And this is the human side as the skills that we need for the next generation. And there's also, it feels, for instance, the potential of these generative AI models to make a number of jobs redundant. So you can totally see the heads spinning here. So what messages you can share with this audience? Essentially, our heads can spin, but we need to be prepared, whatever it is. So what should we be doing? What kind of skills? What should we be pivoting when? Nathan, and I see Devaki also. She's trying to say something. So let's start with you, Nathan.
Yeah, so I'm going to not answer your question here. Because I don't think it's a question of skills. I think it's a question of values. And so at least, I'm raising an 11-year-old, and what I teach her is it's creativity, hard work, and kindness. And I think those are three things that you can wake up and you can do every day, but especially, creativity, curiosity, is maybe the most important thing you can have right now, right? There's no thing you can go out and learn today that's going to mean that you're set for the next 10 years. The best that you can do is just be, continuously curious, and I think that's something we need to instill into the workforce.
I've got 2 points on this. One, I'm actually not worried about everybody being out of work in 10 years from all of this. Half the jobs that exist right now in the United States didn't exist at all when I was born. So there is going to be continuous change. There will be disruption, absolutely, and that's something we need to be careful about. In the immediate future, we have a huge educational challenge for people to understand how these things are applicable, what their limitations are, and what their utility is. But I think that overall, there's going to be adaptation as we figure out what to do. And the second point is, understanding the limitations of these things is critically important. ChatGPT and all the generative AI is really, really good at creating the first draft of whatever you're doing. It's generally not very trustworthy in creating the last draft. And so that is going to amplify the importance of the kinds of things that Nathan talked about. The creativity and hard work and that sort of thing. So the first thing I did when ChatGPT 3 came out was I asked it, hey, if John sees a red fire truck and Tom sees a red truck fire, which one should call the fire department? It did not answer it correctly. Okay, it doesn't yet understand the things it's talking about. It's really, really good at mimicking reasoning, but it doesn't have an inherent understanding of the things that it's talking about. And that goes for all generative AI right now. The technologies involved in it, in these things, are very, very powerful, and they solved a lot of the scaling problems of deep learning when it comes to things like large language models, but it didn't solve some of the inherent challenges in deep learning, like the ability to reason, beyond statistical correlation and things like that, which is in the future. And so that is going to be something which remains to be solved. And until then, it's really important that people, I talked about the misuse of these things, purposeful misuse. There's also accidental misuse as people, learn to calibrate their trust in them.
So Matt, can I actually, it's related to this question because it impacts the NGA directly. Does NGA or the IC community, do you still need to be developing your own foundation models? Or this is sort of like a new model to accelerate the maybe precision or the frequency? So
right.
From an NGA perspective, how would you address that?
Yeah, and so obviously can't speak for the entirety of the IC and DoD, but we're certainly exploring these models, looking at existing models that can be foundational models that can be used and leveraged for various applications. Talking about the sort of limitations and riffing off of that for a second as well. As we explore these, you see that there are limitations, and limitations, one that's very important for us is currency, right? You may have a foundational model that's been trained, and you ask ChatGPT a question about who won the Cardinals baseball game last night, it's not going to be able to tell you, right? So as you look at how you can use these models for various applications, you need to understand their limitations, understand what the foundational models are good for, what they're not good for, where we need to update them with our own data. And that brings a whole set of challenges associated with them on the compute side and on the side of some of these best models are ones that are not going to be easily moved to the high side to incorporate our Intel data into. At least not tomorrow, and so there's a whole host of challenges associated with how we use these, what they're used for, can they be used to, purely unclassed to support historical research? That's an easy thing to do today, but to have these be something that we're going to be able to use in the same way that the GeoGPT reference earlier, right, may envision something where all of the geospatial intelligence is in a ChatGPT-like model. There's a lot of challenges associated with that right now, going back to the questions about scaling and the like. So, certainly exploring these, looking, and actively using them in places where they make sense, but have to recognize the limitations and where they fit in a workflow.
That's fantastic. You almost segued to our last question because the clock is ticking in front of us all. So what USGIF did in preparation for this panel was to ask ChatGPT a question, and we want to see if it was thumbs up or thumbs down. And the question, if you can show it on the screen, I think it's already showing on the screen. So it has to do with how will generative AI change the discipline of GEOINT. So I'll give you a quick moment for the audience to read what ChatGPT came back with. Data augmentation, simulation, scenario generation, target feature generation, anomaly detection, adversarial defense. So let's go from Yuri to Matt. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or hey, they missed this, or this is so far off. I would add that.
I would say thumbs up with some caveats, just because there's so many other things that can be applied to this. So one of the things I think about is the timeline it takes to write a report about the history of a location, right? It may take weeks. You could potentially do that very short now. And so either way, I do like what the response was.
All right, so we got a thumbs up with a caveat. Devaki.
Yeah, I think thumbs up. I think the discipline of GEOINT also is very focused on the workforce development, and I want to see more of that in terms of answered in the question in the prompt. But I do think that this overarchingly makes sense.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the bullet list is a good list. I think the paragraph below where it says, the caveats is missing a big one, which is our ability ability to test, evaluate, and bound the behavior of the systems is going to be critically important to making maximal use of them. So.
Yeah, I think I give it a B-. It does a good job on maybe those direct impacts of how can we answer questions, how can we use generative to answer questions, but it doesn't say anything about how we can use generative to ask questions. And I think that's where some of the most important impacts will be.
Excellent point.
All right. That's one of the new jobs that I've been hearing about as well. So Matt?
Yeah, just to point to that last paragraph as well, I think those limitations, making sure we have a solid understanding of how to use these models, what the left and right limits are, particularly with the ethical considerations. I see in the third bullet point, about target generation. I mean, if you're going to use generative models in a targeting workflow, I don't know that we're there yet. That's something that we need to have some pause on, I guess. But certainly there's a lot of promise around these generative models. There's many applications at which they can, and are being used, and very excited for where they go in the future here.
Yeah. Yuri?
I think one other aspect, just to GEOINT in general, is how organizations plan for this new capability, as far as workforce, as far as budget. I just get a headache thinking about the IT aspect of this and how transport is going to be crucial for all of the users worldwide. So there's definitely going to be a lot of implications.
Right. So how long is it going to take us to get to this Globe GPT, you think? Very quickly. The buzzer is here. 5 years? 2 years?
How long is it going to take to what?
1 year? This Globe GPT.
Oh.
I think that's like asking how long will it take GEOINT to adopt 3D modeling technology. Right. It's like, we've arrived, but it's still happening, right? This is going to be a process.
Yeah. It's a culture challenge as much as it is a technology, and more so than a technology challenge. So.
Right. You're excited, though. Yes? We're excited that you're here. We're excited about your questions, which I'll give to you so you can actually continue this conversation. Once again, it's a unique platform to have all these conversations together. We have the industry here. There were industry questions in there. We have, NGA and the IC community here. We have the tech and the startups and the leaders of the leaders in AI and GEOINT. So I would urge you to take advantage. This is a new topic. Nobody has all the answers. And this is a great opportunity this week for us to come up with some sort of, perhaps, a roadmap for GEOINT and how we can use generative AI together. And with that, thank you again, Yuri, Devaki, Sean, Nathan, and Matt. And thank you, everybody, for being here and for your questions. Enjoy lunch. Thank you.